They say secrets can either protect or destroy you. For Eliana Carter, it did both. At first, it protected her, shielded her from rejection, from disgrace, from a life she desperately wanted to escape. But secrets are like a fire left unattended, they spread, consuming everything in their path. What started as a small lie to secure her marriage grew into something monstrous, something she could no longer control. Now, as she sits alone in a tiny apartment in age, staring at a child that should have never been born, she realizes. She had spent her whole life chasing security. And in the end, all she had left was regret. The small, cramped bungalow barely felt like home anymore. The walls, once painted bright yellow, were now faded and peeling, revealing patches of damp concrete. The rusty iron roof rattled with every passing breeze, and the lingering scent of kerosene smoke from the kitchen mixed with the musty air. Eliana sat on the worn-out brown leather couch, staring at the envelope containing the admissions letter she got from Camden University. Her mother sat on an old brown leather chair peeling cassava for Gary close to Eliana, her hands rough and cracked from years of peeling cassava and making Gary struggle. "Mom," Eliana whispered, her voice barely above a breath. Her mother didn't look up. I got in. Camden University." Her mother finally stopped staring at the letter. She turned slowly, her face unreadable. "Camden," she repeated, blinking as if the name were foreign. "Yes, Mummy." Eliana sat up, her voice growing urgent. "I passed. I got admission." For a brief moment, hope flickered in her mother's tired eyes. But then, reality set in. She sighed, wiping sweat off her forehead with back of her palm cause her palm was stained with cassava. "Eliana, we don't have money for school." The words hit like a slap. Eliana swallowed the lump in her throat. "Mummy, I'll find a way. I can get a part-time job." Her mother shook her head. "You don't understand. School fees, accommodation, feeding. Where will we get the money?" Eliana took the letter from her mother and clenched the letter tighter, her nails digging into the paper. She had won a battle by getting into university. But the real war was surviving it. The paved walkways of Camden University were nothing like the dirt roads of Ajagunle. Everywhere she looked, students in designer clothes stepped out of expensive cars. The gleaming white university buildings stood tall, surrounded by well-manicured green lawns. Eliana, clutching a small nylon bag with her essentials, walked hesitantly through the gates, feeling like an intruder in a world she didn't belong to. Beside her was Sandra, walking in confidence, adjusted her gold hoop earrings, scrolling through her gold iPhone. "Eliana, you don't have to suffer," Sandra said, flicking her perfectly manicured nails. Eliana frowned. "What do you mean?" Sandra smirked, gesturing toward a group of flashy girls laughing near a luxury car. "You think all these girls living the soft life got here by reading books?" She scoffed. "Wake up, Eli. They have sponsors, men who take care of them." Eliana hesitated. "I don't know, Sandra, that's not me." Sandra let out a mocking laugh, flipping her long hair over her shoulder. "Then keep struggling. But when you see me coming back from vacations, dressed in the latest fashion, don't envy me." At first, Eliana ignored her. But then, hunger struck. Bills piled up. The landlord threatened to throw her out. Her mother's voice over the phone was filled with helplessness. And desperation has a way of making choices for you. The high-end restaurant in Lekki smelled of grilled steak, expensive cologne, and vanilla candles. A grand chandelier cast a golden glow over the elegantly set glass tables, where Lagos' wealthy elite dined in luxury. Eliana, nervous, but dressed seductively in a tight black dress and 6-inch heels, makeup flawless, long straight weave styled to perfection, sat at a candlelit table, her fingers trembling slightly as she held a champagne flute. Across from her, Chief Adiwale watched her with amusement. He leaned forward, sliding a thick envelope filled with cash across the table. "You're a beautiful girl, Eliana," he said smoothly. "Don't be afraid. Enjoy yourself." Eliana swallowed hard, staring at the money. Sandra's voice echoed in her head. "Just one night, Eli. That's all it takes." She reached for the envelope. The struggle ended that night. But the consequences has just begun. The private clinic in Yaba, Lagos, was small, underfunded, and eerily silent. The walls, once painted pale green, were now stained and peeling. The plastic chairs in the waiting area were cracked and dusty, and the rusty standing fan in the corner barely moved the stifling air. Eliana, dark-skinned, wearing a loose grey hoodie and black leggings, looking pale and sickly, sat hunched over in the corner of the waiting area, arms wrapped around herself. The strong antiseptic smell made her stomach churn. Dr. Musa, middle-aged, tired-looking, wrinkled blue coat, constantly wiping his forehead with a handkerchief, flipped through a worn-out patient file. "You young girls never learn," he muttered, shaking his head. Eliana didn't respond. She was too busy trying to ignore the sound of a girl crying softly behind the curtain of the procedure room. A nurse appeared. Next. Eliana stood up on shaky legs, her heart pounding. She didn't know it yet, but she was about to make a mistake that would change her life forever. The first pregnancy was an accident. She had been careless, trusting the wrong man. The moment she saw the 2 red lines on the pregnancy test, she knew she couldn't keep it. With no support system and no money to raise a child, she had the abortion. It was painful, but she convinced herself it was necessary. The second time, she wasn't so lucky. The doctor made a mistake. The procedure went wrong. When she woke up in the hospital, groggy from anesthesia, the doctor's voice echoed in her ears. "You have less than a 30% chance of ever getting pregnant again." Her womb was damaged. She left the hospital a changed woman. But instead of stopping, she buried the pain deep inside her and continued living her life. She graduated. She walked away from the past. Or so she thought. The luxurious corporate event hall in Victoria Island, Lagos, was breathtakingly elegant. Golden chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting a soft glow over the room full of Lagos' wealthiest elites. The air buzzed with polite conversation, and the soft melody of a live jazz band played in the background. Eliana stood near the champagne bar, feeling out of place among the powerful business moguls in designer outfits. Across the room, Nathaniel Sterling was engaged in a conversation with a group of high-profile investors. Then, their eyes met. Eliana felt a jolt of electricity. Nathaniel's sharp, intelligent gaze lingered on her, his lips curving into a small, knowing smirk. Eliana quickly looked away, her heart thudding. She heard footsteps approaching. A deep, smooth voice spoke. "I don't believe we've met." She turned. Nathaniel Sterling stood before her. And her life changed forever. The honeymoon suite was like something out of a movie. Golden lamps cast a romantic glow, the king-sized bed was covered in scattered red rose petals, and an ice bucket with a half-empty bottle of champagne sat beside the bed. Eliana watched as Nathaniel turned slowly towards her. The air was thick with tension. "You lied to me, Eliana," he whispered. Her breath hitched. "Nathaniel, please. You lied." His voice was full of disgust. She fell to her knees, sobbing, pleading with him not to leave. Nathaniel almost walked away. Almost. But in the end, he stayed. Yet, their marriage was never the same again. Eliana, anxious but determined, adjusting the fake pregnancy belly under her peach-colored blouse, her hands trembling slightly, stared at herself in the tall gold-framed mirror. Dr. Reynolds stood beside her, nodded approvingly. "If you're careful, this will fool him." Eliana took a deep breath. She was out of options. And so, the lie began. Meanwhile, Nathaniel sent his brother, Julian, to go call Eliana in her room. On getting there, Julian didn't knock. He entered and saw Eliana tying a towel coming out of the bathroom with no pregnancy. Eliana then clutched her flat stomach in shock. The fake pregnancy belly was gone. Standing at the doorway, Julian watched her. "You're not really pregnant, are you?" he said smoothly. Eliana's heart pounded. She knew she was in trouble. Eliana's bedroom was quiet, heavy with tension. Eliana sat stiffly on the bed, visibly distressed, wearing a long satin nightgown, hands shaking in her lap, avoided Julian's gaze. Julian, sitting across from her, swirling a glass of whiskey, smirking like a predator watching his prey, leaned forward. "I won't tell Nathaniel," he said. Eliana exhaled in relief. But then, his smirk deepened. "If you give me what I want." Eliana stiffened, her blood running cold. Julian's voice dropped to a whisper. "I want you, Eliana. Whenever and wherever I say." And she agreed. The sterile walls of the private doctor's office in Victoria Island, Lagos, were as cold as the news Eliana was about to receive. She sat on the examination bed, her hands clammy, her heart pounding in her ears. Dr. Anderson, holding a medical report, standing near the ultrasound machine, studied her file, then looked up. "Congratulations, Mrs. Sterling. You're pregnant." The room spun. Eliana's breath caught in her throat. Pregnant. But the child wasn't Nathaniel's. She gripped the edge of the examination table, swallowing hard. "Are you sure?" she whispered, her voice almost shaking. The doctor smiled. "Yes, You're about 8 weeks along." Eliana felt like she was drowning. Her fake pregnancy had become a real one, but with the wrong man. Now, there was no way out. The lavish living room of the Sterling mansion in Lekki, Lagos, felt colder than ever. The fireplace crackled faintly, but it did nothing to warm the icy tension in the air. Nathaniel, whose grip tight around a whiskey glass, his jaw clenched in silent fury, stood near the fireplace, his dark eyes locked on Eliana with unreadable intensity. Eliana, visibly shaking, her hands clenched into fists at her sides, stood near the dining table, her face streaked with tears. Seated on the couch, Julian relaxed, smirking like the devil himself, sipping whiskey as if enjoying a show, watched them like a spectator at a gladiator match. Nathaniel's voice, when he spoke, was dangerously calm. "Tell me it's a lie, Eliana." The room held its breath. Eliana's chest ached with panic, her knees weak. She opened her mouth, then hesitated. The silence stretched. Nathaniel's whiskey glass shattered against the floor. "Tell me it's a damn lie," he roared. Eliana flinched, tears spilling down her cheeks. She had no more lies left to tell. In a high-end law firm office in Ikoyi, Lagos, where even the air smelled of money and finality, Eliana, as her eyes hollow, her hands trembling as she held a pen over the divorce papers, sat in a black leather chair. While Nathaniel, emotionless, never looking at her, his fingers drumming against the oak desk, impatiently sat across from her. The lawyer, flipping through the documents, clearing his throat, waited. The air conditioner hummed softly, a cruel contrast to the tension in the room. "Sign it," Nathaniel said coldly. Eliana's vision blurred with unshed tears, her fingers trembling as she pressed the pen against the paper. Her last tie to Nathaniel Sterling was about to be severed forever. The moment she signed, he stood up without a word, buttoned his suit, and walked out without looking back. The door clicked shut. And just like that, it was over. A tiny, dimly lit apartment in Age, Lagos, was all Eliana had left. The walls were stained and peeling, the furniture barely functional, the ceiling fan creaked weakly overhead. Outside, the distant sounds of Lagos life carried on, the honking of Okadas, the shouts of street vendors, the laughter of children playing in the next compound. But inside, time had stopped. Eliana, visibly aged from stress and hardship, her once radiant skin now dull, her eyes lifeless, sat on a worn-out couch, staring blankly at the baby sleeping in a makeshift crib beside her. The child, wrapped in a light blue blanket, slept peacefully, a cruel reminder of Julian's betrayal, Nathaniel's wrath, and the price she had paid for her deception. She reached out, her fingers lightly brushing against the baby's tiny forehead. A single tear slipped down her cheek. Softly, brokenly, she whispered, "I did this to myself."